Community Service Award. In 2017, she participated on the ASLA Blue Ribbon panel on climate change. Ms. Jones-Allen is author of Lost in Transit, Lost in the Transit Desert, Race, Transit Access, and Suburban Form, published by Routledge Press in 2017, and co-editor of Design as Democracy, Techniques for Collective Creativity, published by Island Press. She will speak this evening about creating sustainable, community-focused open space at varying scales. Please join me in welcoming Diane Jones-Allen.
So, thank you so much. And I am honored to have had you invite me, and also, honored to have such a great introduction. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully, I'll try to go through this so that some of what I say or show you might stimulate some questions or thought or even debate. I always love that. So hopefully we'll be able to have some discussion afterwards. Okay. So I'm going to talk about creating sustainable open space, community focused at varying scales of the city. In terms of sustainability, the paradigm is there's social, cultural, economic, and environmental sustainability. So for a place to be sustainable, you have to focus on all three, not just one. And there are different scales in which, one can work in the urban environment. The projects I'm going to show you are all the urban environment. So there's the scale of the city, which might be a large, city scaled park or large greenway, or there is, the neighborhood scale, to a particular community. And then there's even down to, the lot scale, where we do residential lot scaled individual work. Looking at these three scales, I'm going to focus on, how you do engagement and placemaking. On the city scale, I'll look at really focusing on the kind of economics of this paradigm of sustainability. In the neighborhood scale, I'm going to focus more on the social cultural aspect. And then on the last project, which is at the residential scale, looking at the environmental portion of sustainability. So the first project is a Claiborne Cultural Innovation District. And the thing about this project is, as you can see, Claiborne Avenue runs through the whole city of New Orleans. So this is in New Orleans. And it has an impact through the whole city. This project was looking at a particular section of this corridor that kind of went, as you could see, through the French Quarter and then toward the uptown of New Orleans. New Orleans is a strange place because uptown is kind of south on here because as you can see, the river bends in New Orleans. It's a crescent city because the river bends. So south becomes north, becomes east. It's because of that bend in the river. And so people there usually think lake to river, or they'll say uptown and downtown and not east and west because it's, directions just get kind of skewed because of the way the city is shaped and the way the Mississippi River kind of impacts that. Let me go back. So the main focus of this project is the fact that, as you can see the slide on the right, so this site was the largest stand of oak trees in North America. And in 1970, that freeway was dropped. And every time I look at those pictures, and it's kind of devastating because it was a beautiful linear park. And as you could see, the freeway de-densified the area and took away the green space. And green space, as we know, trees are so important for health. I mean, it did all kinds of economic, had economic devastation and cultural devastation. And in this project, I'm focusing on the economics, but it had great environmental devastation, right? Because trees clean our air, they help, you know, stabilize and aerate soils. They help to, you know, they capture carbon. They, you know, they clean our air, decarbonization, and they are, you know, beautiful and do really change an environment. So that is the main focus of this project. So there were other studies that were done prior to this project. And this project came about because a study had been done earlier to look at taking the freeway down. And then it was discovered through the engagement that the community didn't want the freeway down because they really had captured the place and they had claimed it. So in this case, the community engagement was done by another team. So the community engagement was done first. That often happens. There's a team hired for community engagement and then a design team after that's done, because often the RFP for design doesn't come out until they know what, you know, what the community wants, what comes out of the engagement. So the engagement was done by a firm called Colligate, led by Brian Lee, who does design justice work. And the chart on the right shows that there was a lot of engagement. It was done mainly in the summer, so a lot of people could come, and there were all kinds of varying types of small meetings, large meetings, workshops, panels, because they wanted to reach all parts of the community. And when you do community engagement, you have to do that. You have to kind of vary the engagement. And I actually participated in one of the panels. And what's also important here is you see the community design engagement report. So it's really important to do a report after you do engagement, because often engagement happens and then the design just goes on and communities don't know if the input they gave during the engagement process was really used. So in this case, a report was done, and especially because there was an RFP that came out for a team to actually do design on the project. And so the report was handed over to the team. And some of the things that came out of that engagement was utilizing human capital as the main investment for the project, which I really like, because we think of capital. So in economics, we think of capital usually as money, but there's other kinds of capital, right? And this picture also demonstrates why the community didn't want the freeway down. Yes, the freeway actually is horrible. It dumps carbon. It has tons of runoff, comes off of that, gallons of water, which causes great problems in New Orleans, which already has to pump its water out. So there's, all kinds of issues with the freeway. But the community felt that if the freeway came down, this activity wouldn't happen anymore, because, as I said, there have been previous studies which showed things like, daylighting. There's a canal that runs under here also, daylighting the canal. And they felt like, well, if there's a big waterway in the middle of this, we can't second line anymore, which is what you're looking at. You're looking at second lines and people coming out to see the Mardi Gras Indians and informal markets and people there at Mardi Gras. So there was also a fear of gentrification, because usually redevelopment happens after infrastructure improvement. So if it was thought that, when the freeway came down, there'd be an influx of money, because that's a huge capital project, and there would be gentrification. And there actually has been gentrification on one side of the freeway, INFRASTRUCT, which happened post-Katrina. And gentrification, which I'm not going to talk about here, I give a lecture on, which I could, but it's a complicated thing, because gentrification, right, in itself is not a bad word, because redevelopment is a great thing. the thing is just that people don't want displacement. So often it's a misconception, about gentrification, because all communities want redevelopment and new projects. They just would like to remain. So the thing here was to use the human capital and then to strengthen the coalitions based on environmentally sound development and cultural preservation values. So that was really important, especially since this was, this linear park with a double LA of oak trees. And there are great environmental issues, so coalescing around that. So I was on the team, actually my firm and an engineering firm were the team that, won the RFP to actually look at what to do under here. And there was actually a nonprofit that went after the funding that got this, a nonprofit from the community. And so that was really exciting too. So one of the things, and thinking about human capital, was there's already great entrepreneurship in New Orleans through, youth groups and music and, the informal marketplace. There was already great entrepreneurship. So it's like, how do we strengthen that? And then also looking at the green infrastructure. So there's the Lafitte Greenway is a huge green infrastructure piece. It's a large linear park that actually goes perpendicular through this overpass through the freeway. So how do we connect to that? And the fact that there was a canal that ran through there also. So, how do we deal with the issue of green infrastructure and this piece of transportation infrastructure? And then the other piece was a cultural piece. Like New Orleans is a wonderful place because it's a gumbo of architecture and music, food. And that's because, New Orleans was French, then Spanish, then French, and it had a large influx of Haitians. It had a large influx of Germans and Italians. So it's a really interesting place. And if you look closely, none of that you can still see, especially in the architecture, you can see all those influences. And you can see it, in the food and the music. That's why traditional native New Orleans music and food is like nothing else, because of, you had Canadians that came down, and became Cajuns. So it's a wonderful place because it has this rich history to draw upon, a rich cultural history. And so these were just some design guides. It's always good to look at precedents, look at what examples of what other people have done, and how you can use those. So this project, that yellow area I showed you, it was 19 blocks, which is a large project. and so we split it because of that into 4 conceptual zones: the Garden of the Moors, back of town, Tambourine and Fan, the Spirit Circle. And basically the Garden of the Moors is where we're gonna try to capture that water. And that's where it connects to the Lafitte Greenway, back of town. That's where we have area for informal market and Tambourine and Fan. We have a youth area, and then the Spirit Circle is a more passive area. So we kind of used, inspiration of Moorish architecture. And the main thing here, the cool part, is to take the water from the freeway, and then we put it into these cisterns that would actually clean the water and clean it and slow it down before it went into the lake. Pontchartrain, which is what happens to it now. It goes into the pumping stations, and then it goes out. So this water would be cleaned, and then it would go to the lake. And then some of it actually we would use for watering on plant material. And then this is the back of town connection, which is kind of flexible roller skating ring, like areas for activity, because it's connected, as I said, to the Lafitte Greenway, which also already has playing fields. So a skate park, a basketball court, And then this area, which I really like, is kind of a place for teenagers to just hang around, which I always find out that in design, you know, in urban design, there tend to be like the undesirables, homeless people and teenagers. And I don't know why. I love teenagers and I think they should be in public open space. So we created this learning campus, which would kind of be like you know, a place where, you know, a maker studio where we have computers and, you know, they could do kind of tech things that teenagers like to do, and a recreation campus, and then like a youth city hall area. And then kind of a flexible space for neighborhood gatherings, a flexible gathering space. And then also like some offices for community meetings, because there are not enough spaces for that. That's one thing they wanted. And then a flexible market where this was the informal marketplace. So one thing we did is, after all of this was designed, so you always have to continue to have engagement. So we took the master plan out to the site and we put it up in the site so that people could come and look at it and tell us if we were on and off the mark. And the interesting thing is, you see the pictures on the side, that is not the design. That's what happens there already, which is really exciting, because often people will look at this slide and say, oh, you did. And I said, no, this is what they do themselves. They painted the columns. Like they say, they have these kind of pop-up markets. So this is before the design is installed. And so one of the fears that I have is, but luckily we're kind of doing it piece by piece, is that I don't want to over design, because you don't want to stop the spontaneity. So, you know, that's some of the feedback that we got, and we're kind of pulling back and making sure that we don't, because you can over design so that the spontaneity that already happens. What we want to do is kind of encourage it, stabilize it, and mainly because someday, this is I-10, it may come down. And if it does come down, the thing is that the space underneath has been claimed. So the next project I'm going to show is about placemaking connected to culture, history, and civic action. And this is the Dr. Martin Luther King Memorial Walk. And so this kind of shows you a piece of, well, it kind of, it really shows you the whole Malpamine Canal, which goes all the way from Lake Pontchartrain to the river. And the reason why I'm showing that is because the project sits on this canal. So this is the site, and that blue line was under this. And the site actually is just a small piece. It's like a pilot project. And it's located at Aretha Castle Haley, which used to be Dryad Street, in Martin Luther King Boulevard. So this site has a long history. And the interesting thing, the thing I love about neighborhoods is, you know, they're, in most communities, like you talk about, like, who is the community? And so where does history start? And most communities, the history is layered, especially in America. There are all different kinds of people that have come. And this community was interesting because it was an immigrant community. Germans and Italians mainly owned a lot of the property and stores and businesses, but the customers tended to be African American, and also a lot of the people that worked or played there, like the Black musicians, they also got to perform. So it was a very integrated, and most of America's cities were a lot integrated than we believed. They were much more than they are now. I mean, all kinds of people live together, even though we had stations in place. But this community is reflections of that. Like I said, there was a German baker and a Jewish merchant, and Americans that lived and shopped in the community. And there even was an African American architect who designed the market. So very culturally integrated. So things, of course, changed. There was, I guess, as they term, white flight. And so the community became African-American. There was disinvestment. And the picture on the left is Aretha Kessel Haley, who was part of, she was part of the Student Nonviolent Conference, SNCC, and she was part of the Civil Rights Movement. So she had done a lot of work in that community. And then the guy in the center is Frank Hayden, who this site is an existing site. There's a sculpture that's already on it. And actually the site was designed in the 70s. And so this project is a redesign, really. And then of course, Martin Luther King, that the site is named after. So at post-Katrina, there was, because as I said, this community deteriorated, there was a large capital investment, planting and new sidewalks. And usually what happens with capital investment, so, you know, this was state and federal funding that the city got to do this improvement, then usually developers and improvement comes after, because, you know, developers and business owners see that, okay, the city and the government has put money in this area, so this is a good opportunity for me to renovate a building or to move my business here. So that's what happened here. There then came new residents, tourists, and higher property values. So, you know, the question is, you know, can this kind of redevelopment or revitalization, can it be inclusive, right? And not become gentrification, right? So can it be inclusive so that you do all these wonderful things, but you don't displace the old community and they get to participate? And this is just some of the things that happen. New Orleans Jazz Market, a food museum, renovation of a school became a big kind of marketplace with actually housing units, residential units. So there was a lot of conversion of, you know, old buildings to mixed use. And then this is a flyer from the Jane Jacobs Walk, because the new community that has moved in, they use the space, you know, because now it's a lovely urban environment with trees and new development. So they have this annual Jane Jacobs Walk. And I guess everyone knows Jane Jacobs. I love her. She's like the person that really kind of made people, she kind of saved New York from Robert Moses dropping all the freeways through everything. And really, you know, she wrote a book about, you know, the life of urban spaces, and kind of the one that kind of was like the forefront of kind of revitalizing cities and making them, though, inclusive. So they do this walk, you know, all the things about eyes on the street. So they do this walk every year called the Jane Jacobs Walk. And they just kind of started doing this, I guess, post-Katrina when the redevelopment happened, right? And then this is like the community that still lives kind of not like on the main portion where the developments happen, but adjacent and around some of the old community, you know, pre-revitalization, and then the adjacent community. And then they use this space differently. So they use it for, they have like an annual march, and they usually do it on, well, they do it on Martin Luther King's actual birthday, which is January the 15th. So the idea was, you know, so you have one community that kind of wants a nice, beautiful place to kind of sit and have their coffee. And then you have another community who wants to use it as memorialization and, you know, celebration and even a place of protest. So, you know, how do you get both of these things out of the same space, and how do you use this to kind of bring the community together. So the first thing we did was bring the two groups onto the site together. Because usually when you have these community meetings, you go into a room. But I actually find that, you know, the landscape is healing. People tend to, you know, when they're not closed in a room, they tend to be more peaceful and collaborative. And so we brought them out, and it was really great because they were able to take pictures and talk to each other about, and they're not looking at a drawing, right? So they're actually on the site, and they could say, well, I think this should happen here, or I think that should happen here, or what do you think about that? And, you know, and so it was really wonderful. So we had them on the site. And then after that, we did bring them inside. And then we put them in the circles, because circles are really good for being egalitarian and for being able to like have really good discussions. And so it's really great. You could see on the left, like one person showing the other person a picture, because they took pictures when they were outside, and you know, of what they saw and what they think should happen. And you can see on the left the discussion happening. So that's what we call, you know, it's a transactive engagement. So this is some of the site. Everything in New Orleans has water under it. Just might as well say it. It was like Venice, actually. And so water everywhere. And so it's interesting because the canal was wooden. It was a wooden lined canal. And then, so I guess like in the 40s, they lined it with brick. And still to this day, this is a picture we took when we went down underneath. It's brick. It's actually quite beautiful. So part of the idea was being able to let people be aware, because right now you have no idea that there's water under you. And this is also some cues from the site. So when you're designing, you want to like really take cues from what's there. And one thing is that this pink structure was a fountain, which lots of times fountains in cities are not running because fountains cost a lot. There's maintenance and then just the water bill. So it was off most of the time. And so the issue too was people, of course, did not know that inside of the sculpture, there were quotes from the I Have a Dreams speech. And the interesting thing about the sculpture is that when people first saw it in, I guess it was 1972, when it was unveiled, they just screamed because they were expecting a figure of Martin Luther King. But Frank Hayden was an abstract sculptor. And so he, you know, this was his vision, his vision of MLK. And it's like an egg, which represents life, and these embracing arms, and then a quote. And now, after many years, the community loves it. They call it the abstract. They say, oh, I'm going to meet at the abstract. But the problem is, because of that fountain, you couldn't see those quotes. And so those are people from the firm in there looking, saying, oh, there are quotes in here. So we did 4 schemes. It's always good to do like several schemes. And then we came back to the community. And then they selected scheme 3. You know, so you could see it has survey questions. So we did, you know, survey, and we came back with the schemes, and then they chose the 4th scheme. And so this is the final design. And we want to punch this hole in the canal so you could look down and see the water. But unfortunately, they let us saw cut that, and hopefully they plan to do that part in the future because you'll see what was built. But everything else is pretty much the way it was designed. And the idea was to have a place that was beautiful and that you could come and have your coffee, but to turn that fountain into a stage so that when groups came to celebrate MLK's birthday or to, you know, commemorate or whatever, protest, they had a stage. And also that you could walk up and look right into the sculpture and see the quotes. So this is the civic action before, and this is the civic tradition before and civic tradition after. So before, as I said, the groups of people would come, you know, to celebrate, protest. And the space was very tight. It had these, I love roses, but they were kind of blocking, you see you couldn't see in and out, squishing the view. And people had to like stand in the fountain if they, wanted to be up higher. And this is after the design was installed. And so now it just kind of opened it up to the whole street, right? And there's a stage, and you can see that's the Governor Edwards and the Mayor Cantrell. And so it becomes a stage and people can spread out. So it serves those kind of activities. And then it's also like a peaceful place. And I love this photo because she's kind of embraced by the Martin Luther King's arms. And she's reading the quotes. And one thing we did, because, you have to have equal access, right? In terms of like ADA. So we weren't able to ramp around that. It just wasn't big enough space to do the ramp at the right slope. So there are steps, but what that means is somebody in a wheelchair could not have access to the quotes. And so that's not allowable. So what we did is we took the quotes out and we had them engraved onto those concrete seating blocks. So now everybody can see the quotes. If I'm in a wheelchair, I can see the quotes, that are on the blocks. And if I want to, I can, and if I'm able to, I can walk up and see the quotes like the young lady. And so these are just some pictures that show like, it's kind of this public space now. It opens up to the street because in New Orleans, life is the street. But it's also kind of a nice place for a stroll or to sit. And even though we did take out most of the lower landscape, we kept all those wonderful cypress that you see on the left. And then we put in new trees on the right. They'll eventually catch up. To kind of reestablish this lovely LA. And I love the pattern, the shadow patterns. And the thing, it's a flexible kind of space because actually we designed those seating walls so that people could sit on them and look in toward the sculpture. But we noticed like when when there's activity, people actually use them to stand on or to look out, which is kind of nice. And there on the left, you can see the engraving. And so this picture, the lower left, that is where that glass was supposed to go. We had some pushback, of course, from the client about worrying about, but their materials, there's many other examples we showed where that happens. So there's something they're thinking about, but it was sod cut so that that can pop out if they, if they hopefully do decide to take it out and put the glass in. And then the nice thing too is like, so it's kind of like, I think, a place where you can have both communities being able to use it, right? You can have cultural activity, where like you see someone's playing the cello over there, and or you can have a protest. So it's really a great space that can serve both communities and heal them. So then the last project I'm going to show you, because I don't know if I'm getting over time, is at the lot scale, right? Because the last project was, kind of at the community neighborhood scale. And so this project I really love. This is the NORCAP project, New Orleans Redevelopment Authority Community Adaptation Project. And this is really a response to flooding, climate change, Katrina. And so it was a pilot project too that you can see the blue line, that's Gentilly. And Gentilly, it was one of the communities that was flooded. A lot of people heard about the Lower Nine, but Gentilly is actually on the other side of that same industrial canal. Closer to the lake, and it was totally inundated with water. So this project, came about way after Katrina. I mean, Katrina was 2005. It's hard to believe. And so this meeting happened in 2018, but it was a way to, New Orleans realized post-Katrina that you have to live with water. So, you know, what happened is, you know, the city put up flood walls and levees, and, you know, the flood walls were breached because of the storm surge, because of, you know, the saltwater intrusion, which depleted all the cypress, which couldn't stop the surge. Anyway, so this project was about, okay, so we could put a big facility in the community to capture the water, or we could break up the stormwater facility. So a facility like a big detention pond or a retention pond, or, you know, a big, you know, water capture, which is they did in a lot of other communities there. But here they decided to try this project where instead of putting one big facility, let people learn about stormwater management, understand about flooding, have some control and manifest destiny in terms, you know, of what's happening, you know, with their property and their community. So as you could see, every household that was eligible would get $25,000. And it's funny because this, they thought they'd get about 100 people and they got like 400 people. So each resident that qualified would get $400. And you could see this is Brenda Rhodes. She's a director of NORA. And they had an RFQ and they selected 2 architecture firms, mine and another one, Dana Brown, several architecture firms, landscape architecture firms that would work with the individuals and do stormwater management or green stormwater infrastructure on their individual properties. And this was like kind of a session where people could learn about green infrastructure and talk to the landscape architects and see the kind of things that you might do. So this is some of the like information we gave out, you know, to, because often stormwater, you know, bioswales and things like that have a bad reputation. Often people feel like, I don't want, you know, a ditch in my yard. I don't want weeds, you know, I want a traditional New Orleans landscape. I want some azaleas, and you're telling me you're going to give me grass. So, you know, getting people to understand the beauty of it, right? And then also, you know, the benefit it will have to their property. So we had to figure out like how much water we're going to capture. And then of course, this is a budget because we could only spend, you know, $25,000, and the $25,000 had to include the design and the installation. So it was turnkey, right? But it's very cost effective, and it's a way to, you know, filter, absorb, and direct the stormwater, and give people like, you know, it's different, you know, like with a flood wall or a levee, you hardly see the water, it's being pumped out. But here you kind of see what's happening with the water, you understand, you know, the impacts of flooding. So we, this is just an example. I'm going to show you a few examples. These lots, there's nice little kind of cottage type homes, little bungalows sitting on single family lots with lots of lawn and lots of driveways. So in this one, we spent $18,000, the whole thing. And here, as you can see, there's lots of cracked driveways. So we put in permeable paving to basically absorb the water, and also to visually improve, but really to, you know, to absorb and control the water. Here's another one. Same thing, it's a single family, most of them are. And a lot of them, some people were really into it, like these, a lot of these homes already have solar panels and they were into the green thing. But it was working with them to actually, because it's their private property, to, you know, satisfy their aesthetic, but also satisfy the need to capture water. And so this one, as you could see, we took up all this awful concrete and put in a dry creek and some gravel, a garden, and changed the the concrete sidewalk into a lovely permeable paver sidewalk. And then this one, and so, you know, at first there was some pushback and you're going to take up all my lawn. But the great thing is that once they started to happen, then more and more people wanted them. And the people that had signed up kept calling Nora saying, when am I getting mine? So-and-so has theirs, you know? And we tried to like really use a lot of techniques. Like this one has a raised stormwater pan, a raised stormwater planter, a rain barrel, permeable paving, the dry creek, and they're vast improvements. And the people are really happy because there were been several storms and these properties haven't flooded. And one thing that we did, what happens is once we've done this, it becomes theirs, right? So everybody got a maintenance manual because, you know, they had to sign, they have to take care of it. And then also we calculated, you know, how much runoff water was captured. So in this one, we captured 3,490 gallons of water, and we reduced 16% of the impervious paving. And so then with all of them, we can compare it to if we had have done one facility, and with all the water, it probably would have been impossible, huge facility to capture the amount of water we did doing it individual, one by one. And people are very, very happy. So thank you. And I'm gonna stop here and take some questions if you have any or comments. Oh, I think you're on mute, or somebody's on mute that's talking.
Virginia.
Oops. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I muted. Okay. So thank you, Diane, for a great presentation. And so I guess we can virtually clap for you, or we can do like that. So what we can do is there's a couple different ways we can take questions. You can use if you have the raise your hand feature, we can let people raise their hands and ask a question directly. And we can also have questions in the chat. So I see Kim has made a comment already. Kim Forbeck, did you want to say anything? Or Melanie Aarons? And it says that it's recording. Is this this is being recorded? We have a yes. Okay. So so this will be available through Villa Terrace, Friends of Villa Terrace, I should say. So of the people who have made comments, would you like to address Diane directly?
Sure. So someone asked, tell us about the funding for the water management for the individual homeowners. So this was money that was federal money that the city of New Orleans got. It actually was HUD and EPA money. And they, at the EPA part of it, like I said, it was like post-Katrina flood money. And so they could have decided to make a big detention. But with the HUD funds and putting that together, they came up with this idea of doing this individual project. And that's how come they were able, you know, through the HUD funding process, they were able to make it so they could give each homeowner $25,000. And of course, so the homeowner never saw the $25,000, but it was theirs. So what happened with that $25,000? They paid the landscape architect and paid for the materials and the installation. And we worked with a contractor because we're not a design build, neither Dana Brown isn't either. So they were like teams of, we worked with a contractor, and and another engineering firm, Aptum, and a contractor. And then the other firms had teams, so that, which was good, so that we did the design and then we kind of oversaw, you know, the contractor putting it in. But it was all turnkey, and it was HUD EPA money, which is really great.
So we have a question from Kim Forbeck. Could you speak more about addressing concerns on mitigating the effects of gentrification?
Good question, because I think it's really about, you know, understanding gentrification, and because often, you know, there's this misunderstanding of the communities and people that get upset about gentrification. They're not upset that there's going to be like new, you know, the Starbucks or a Whole Foods, or they're upset that, you know, the property values go up, or there's eminent domain or something that makes them move, you know. So finding ways through, you know, there are a lot of methods, right? So like moratorium on raising property tax for neighborhoods that people that have been there in a neighborhood for so long, right? Or people over a certain age, or things like that. There are all kinds of things that you can, you know, work with all, you know, the city and local governments and state to figure out, okay, so how do we not have so much displacement? How can we at least let people that own their property stay and take advantage? Because I think sometimes what is thought that people don't want the improvement and they don't want the new people at all. And I found, and like even with that project, that the new people were fine. and to the new people, the old people were fine. It's just that everybody kind of wants to do what they want to do, right? And everybody wants to be a part of it. So finding ways to do that. And there are, you know, ways, you know, to make sure people can, you know, keep their properties, or, you know, participate in the new park or the new retail, or, you know, so I think those are the kind of things I think we have to do, and kind of really understand both sides and get people to kind of work together. And when they work together too, then they can put pressure on their municipality and their state governments, and the, you know, to do the things about the taxes and the other things that they want.
So thank you for that answer, Diane. Do you want to read there's another question in the chat. Do you want to read it or have me read it?
Let's see. How many households participated, and did you calculate the total captured where it falls for the overall project? So there were 400 people that signed up, and we have not done all 400. So this started in 2018. This project is still going on. So far, we've only done 30. And then the other firm has done maybe about 60, maybe about twice as many. So there's still a lot more to do. And every project, the water is being calculated. Yes. So that once we get the total, we're pretty much figuring out that it is probably going to capture a lot more. It would have to be a huge facility, right? But we don't have the definite, like you're saying, the total yet, just because they're still being installed. We started, and so it's like 3 years. But yeah, so there've been over 100 done, almost 100, and a lot more. And now other communities want part of the pilot. So that's the thing too, like, because other communities are seeing this and saying, we want a NORCAP project.
I would like to interject. One of the things that I hear you saying is that your role as a landscape architect, architecture firm, is really essential to this. I think sometimes homeowners are given options of doing things, but they don't necessarily have a designer involved, especially a landscape architect. So could you speak to that?
Oh yeah, because, you know, they often, especially in this case, had a misconception about stormwater management, right? They thought, oh, I'm going to get a ditch with, and you say grasses, I'm going to get some weeds. So you have someone who knows plants and can show them, like we did, that they're beautiful. The Louisiana iris and native grasses are wonderful. Yeah, so yeah, being able to like explain materials, right? And to explain, you know, about permeable pavers and all those kind of things. So it is important to have a designer. But, you know, and that's a great thing, you know, it goes both ways. So as a designer, we have to listen to, okay, so what is their aesthetic and how can we, you know, satisfy that they want to keep their driveway, you know, but then explain to them, okay, we're gonna put in these permeable pavers. So yeah, it's important. It would have been, I think, if they just like went from the homeowner to the contractor, a lot of the technical aspects might have been different, you know, because the contractors have other motivations than the landscape architect. So the landscape architect's kind of a good liaison between both. Yeah.
And so Brenda Rosenschaft asked about, do you do projects like this here, I guess in Milwaukee? How do homeowners and businesses work with a company to design, find funds, and bring those type of projects to the necessary local city planning and approval boards?
Yes, I mean, that's actually, and I haven't done, unfortunately, any projects there in Milwaukee. I've been doing stuff now in Texas and, well, actually kind of all over the place. We have a project in Dayton and Richmond, Virginia, Baltimore, Maryland. And so I'll be glad to come to Milwaukee. We travel. But anyway, that's really important because the communities, you know, had really pressed because of the issues after Katrina, right? The issues that those flood walls were built. And there was a big lawsuit, right? That those flood walls were built incorrectly, you know, and you know the other things that happened with Katrina, you know, the dredging that causes saltwater intrusion. So people at the grassroots level, and then there was a plan called the Green Dot Plan where they put green dots and they were gonna like get rid of these communities. Like Gentility had a green dot and Lower Ninth Ward, Broadmoor, where the mayor lives, they had a green dot, meaning those are gonna be wetlands and people have to move. And people were like, no, but you have to find a way to solve these things. And you have to get federal dollars for this. And now, and especially because like your community, you don't have to have a Katrina, right? You don't have to have a Katrina for this because there's climate change and we're having these events and you want to like mitigate this stuff, get ahead of it. I mean, this was a case where people this happened after the fact, but luckily there's going to be more, so they're dealing with it. But now all communities should get projects like this because we all have these climate issues. So it's a matter of organizing or getting the community organizing, you know, like talking to your council person, right? So your council person then, you know, works with your state legislator who goes and gets state and federal funds. And there are all kinds of funds available for this. I mean, they got an EPA, these are kind of grants. They got an EPA and HUD money. And there's a website for NORCAP where you can go on and it talks about all the money. It actually has a video that shows the projects and where Nora talks about how they got the funding. Yeah, so it was a grant. So good question. And you could bring this to your community through just what you said. All the neighborhoods working with their council people, working with your local city planning and, you know, and your city, and then applying for these state and federal funds. Mm-hmm. Because that's what happened here. The city of New Orleans got these funds.
So there's a question about could you talk more about the processes for getting community input on the proposed schematic options and choosing one? I think this refers to the first and second projects that you showed, where you had a range of, or you had several options. Yes. And a lot of community engagement about this whole thing. Could you talk a little bit more about that in one or both cases?
Yes, so that's a good question because, you know, communities, they want designers, you know, they know they're not designers, they want your technical expertise, but they have opinions about things and they want to know that you're listening. And so it was really important that after that first charrette or community meeting we had, where we went on, that was all the same meeting. We were on the site for about a half an hour to an hour, and then we came in. So we took all that, right? And then we came back to them with those designs. And so it's really important to come back to them, right? To get their approval, right? Because also the reason why we did 4 designs, because people had kind of different ideas. And so we wanted people to know that we listened to all of the ideas. And then we came up with these 4 schemes. And we actually had like a survey which asked different questions about, you know, each of the projects. I mean, there were some things that kind of came out that people wanted a place to sit, you know, they wanted it to be a flexible space. They still wanted to keep the sculpture and the, you know, they weren't at, you know, the fountain was broke, you know, so there were some kind of universal things, but then other people had kind of different things. So it was important to come back, not to just come back with, here's the final design, right? To come back with, we listened to you, you know, but you have to start narrowing it down, right? At some point, you know, so we came back with 4 designs and then had them like pick, and they could pick elements. Even in this case, they all said, we want that one. But we were thinking, okay, they might pick elements and we can put that together. But I think that's important. That's a way to have continual engagement and to make people feel like, because it's hard, you know, you have to go to these meetings and take your evening. You should be feeding your kid or getting some rest, but you take and you come out to these meetings and you spend all this time, and then you never hear from the designer again until they're, you know, showing you the final design or breaking the ground, you know? So it's really important to come back to the community.
That I also noticed that you talked about how these spaces were really hardworking in terms of meeting different needs all at the same time, meeting the cultural needs, the aesthetic needs, the needs for protest and civic spaces in public space. Mm-hmm. So did the community understand that you were moving toward that multitasking?
Yes, because like I said, there were kind of, I mean, it wasn't as simple as 2 factions, but there was kind of like 2 groups, right? Who kind of had different needs or ideas. One group wanted a nice civic space, right? All that investment had happened. They moved into the nice new condos and they wanted a nice civic space. And then the other group had been using it historically. So it was trying to find, you know, kind of like, not to make a compromise, but to make space that satisfied both needs, right? And they were really happy because, you know, it seemed to, you know, to do that, you know, they could come, you know, and just sit and have a nice, you know, nice, beautiful green space, or it still allowed people to come on January 15th or whatever and, you know, use that stage and have, you know, a community organization. And then it was a space where, you know, they could still have cultural activities, kind of new, something they really hadn't been doing there before as much. But now, as you can see, they have dance performances and concerts and all kinds of stuff. And those are things that actually both communities do together.
There's a question, sort of a follow-up from Janine. What's the follow-up with the communities, neighborhoods, and individuals who were involved in the planning and who are now living in this re-energized city or area?
So you mean the MLK one? Okay.
I think so. Well, it could be for the first one as well. Janine, do you want to say?
Yeah, first, let me say that I'm really struck and so aware of the amount of time and effort and listening and trust that needed to go into this relationship, because it was really a partnership and a trust commitment on both parts. I was in New Orleans 9 months after Katrina. I was there with a doula. Babies were being born a number of months after Katrina. And the devastation in the community was unbelievable. And the babies were a way of connecting to some future life in the midst of so much that was taken away. To look at streets that used to have trees that now look like just poles, like utility poles. All their limbs were stripped away. There was nothing. There was quiet, no birds, nothing, nothing, nothing. And to imagine an area that had been like that, where you look at watermarks and you look around to see how high did the water go, and you kept looking up and up and up, and the mark was at the roof. That's where the water had been. And to consider that that's what people lived and died with, and remember the people who survived and still had the wherewithal to want something better, trust that somebody will come, a designer, the community, FEMA, somebody will come and truly listen to them. I mean, what an act of faith that is. And what a sacred trust. And what I hear in the way that you did your presentation, Diane, is that you took it as a sacred trust. That changes the dynamic completely. And not only did you invest in them, they're investing in you and in each other. And the question for me is, now what? They have this, it's a beautiful space. My gosh, it's gorgeous, it's unbelievable. Moving forward, how do they maintain the momentum to not only look at their lots, which have now been transformed, but the community at large, which has also been transformed? Where does the energy come from to continue what's been started? Who's there to help that move along?
So in the Nora Cap, that's the last project with the individual lots. One thing that's happening, as I said, that there's still other lots that have to be done. And so it's really great because the people who've had their lots done, they have been like witnesses, to people that, my property's not flooding and people are coming to see. And so it's really kind of not, changing things for that neighborhood, but actually for the city, because, there was, like I said, a little pushback on doing this stormwater management, right? People want lawns and you're telling them, we're going to put, some stones in your lawn. So it's really like the people that are getting this are kind of coalescing and spreading the word and kind of, very active. So that's kind of really a very active and positive process. In the MLK project, it's been quite interesting because there has been some conflict there. And the conflict has not been, and I guess I let this out at first, the conflict has not been between the two factions. The two factions actually have been wonderful, and the community, they're like doing things together beyond this space now, because they, that activity was in the jazz market there. And so, and with the Merchants Association, Aretha Castle Haley Merchants Association was my client. They actually got the grant through Nora to do that MLK space. So now the whole community has coalesced together, the people that live around there, the people that were there before, and they're trying to be more inclusive and go forward. But the conflict became between the community and the teenagers. So we got pushback, not from the community, but from the funder about those walls. They wanted us to put like spikes on those walls so that the teenagers wouldn't skateboard. And we really pushed back on it a lot. But that area is well used, well maintained, although there are some marks on that concrete from the teenagers skateboarding. So we actually have been talking to the Merchants Association about like putting some coating on it, but not going for spikes. And the thing is like I was saying before, yes, teenagers come in skateboard and that their wheels do mark up concrete. but we just didn't want to put spikes because then it's hard to sit, you know, and it kind of takes away from the beauty and the pureness, what we were trying to get at, this kind of clean, modern look with those long walls. But we're trying to work out, like, you know, how do you, you know, deal with that now? Like maybe making it more inclusive for the teenagers. Maybe if the teenagers had some other formal activity happening there, they might appreciate it and not skateboard on it, or yeah, putting on a new coating. But that is one of the conflicts that has happened with the teenage use.
Well, and I
on those walls.
So Diane, that's I'd like to thank you for mentioning that inclusive part of that. Yes, teenagers also are part of who we all need to include. Older people, people of different backgrounds, whatever, of different abilities. So I think this that would be the last question. There was another comment about the possibly having a standard book of lot designs that could be repeated. But if I think we could probably continue this conversation, but I think we've taken, certainly we appreciate all the time you've given us. And I appreciate everyone's comments and discussion here. So unless you have any other closing remark, Diane, we'd like to thank you for a wonderful, informative, and inspiring discussion. And maybe we can spread the word that maybe others in Milwaukee would like to hear from Diane or work with Diane. So without further ado, I'm seeing some thanks here for you. And anything else you want to say, Diane?
Oh, I just want to say thank you. I enjoyed the discussion. And that's a really good idea about the book. I'm going to tell the client that, because we have all those because we have to make those individual maintenance manuals. So you could kind of compile them, you know, for the one so far, and people could kind of pick. That's a great idea. And I really love, you know, I'll just be honest. It makes you feel good when you give like a talk and then people have questions. So it makes you feel like, oh, okay. You know, so this was really wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And I do hope I can come and visit the villa. I really want to do that and see the gardens.
Well, Diane, there is a push in Milwaukee for, I mean, there's an effort to do green infrastructure, and certainly your ideas and your ways of working with people would add to what's already happening on different levels. So, so it was wonderful to see you again, even if it's on screen, and to see everyone else whose faces are up here and those even behind the boxes. So thank you all. And I think we're going to have a couple, are we going to have some clapping? And was there any announcements from our MC, from anyone from Villa Terrace, Stephanie or anyone else? I'll let you take it away.
I think we lost Allison, who has several young children, or 2 young children. But I'll just say thank you, Virginia. You're such a good friend to the Friends of Villa Terrace. And thank you, Diane. It was such a wonderful lecture. And thank you both on behalf of the Friends of Villa Terrace and the Spring Garden Lecture Series Committee, our first virtual series. And I think we're not doing too bad because of your talent and